The Pacific jungle was still dark when the American patrol pushed forward, their boots sinking into the wet soil of central Luzon. The air was thick, heavy with humidity, and the distant rumble of artillery rolled across the valley like thunder waiting to break. It was early February 1945, and the U.S. Army's 37th Infantry Division was fighting its way toward Manila, one brutal mile at a time. The men advanced cautiously, weapons raised, scanning every shadow for movement. The Japanese defenders had been using civilians as human shields, and sometimes civilian-looking women as decoys for suicide attacks. Every rustle in the brush could mean death. And then they saw movement ahead. A group of Japanese women, thin, shaking, covered in mud, stumbled out onto the path. They dropped to their knees and raised their hands, not to surrender, but to prepare for execution, because they believed that Americans killed all POWs. What happened next would become one of the most unexpected acts of humanity in the entire Pacific War. To understand why these women believed death was unavoidable, we need to go back to the months before Manila's liberation, when Japanese propaganda warned, Americans will torture and execute every Japanese woman captured. Civilians were told to avoid surrender at all costs. Mothers were ordered to kill their children before letting them fall into American hands. Soldiers encouraged mass suicide to preserve the honor of Japan. So when these women stumbled into the jungle, starving, dehydrated, mentally broken, they carried the weight of that propaganda like a death sentence. They had survived months of bombardment. They had survived their own army's retreat. But they did not believe they would survive capture. The American unit they encountered belonged to the 148th Infantry Regiment, part of the veteran 37th Division. These were battle-hardened men who had fought through Bougainville, New Georgia, and the long, bloody Luzon campaign. They had seen every kind of trick. Japanese soldiers disguised as civilians. Civilians forced to walk ahead of Japanese troops. Women carrying grenades under their clothes. So when the patrol leader, Staff Sergeant Leonard Hayes, saw the group kneeling in the mud ahead of him, his first reaction wasn't pity. It was suspicion. Something wasn't right. These women weren't soldiers. They weren't armed. And they weren't accompanied by men. Their clothes were torn rags. Their faces were hollow, gaunt. They looked more like survivors of a famine than accomplices of the Imperial Army. But Hayes held the men back. No one approached. Not yet. Because the Pacific War had taught them bitter lessons. And one wrong move in the jungle could cost lives. The fighting around Manila was among the most chaotic of the entire Pacific campaign. The Japanese 14th Area Army had pulled back through the jungle, leaving terrified civilians behind. Rumors of massacres, executions, and mass suicides spread like wildfire. The area where the 148th Regiment was patrolling was a maze of bamboo thickets, ravines, collapsed huts, abandoned farm plots, and small camps left behind by retreating Japanese forces. Snipers were everywhere. Booby traps were everywhere. Nothing could be trusted, not even a group of starving civilians. The patrol halted. Hayes motioned for silence. They watched the women through their rifle sights. The women looked absolutely convinced they were about to die. Slowly, one of the women raised her hands higher. Her mouth moved silently. Prayer. Another woman bowed her head to the earth, touching her forehead to the mud. An act of total submission, something only done when death is certain. Then, something even more chilling. One of them exposed her neck, tilting her chin upward, as if inviting the Americans to shoot. Hayes froze. These weren't suicide bombers. These were women fully convinced they were standing in their final moments. Hayes lowered his rifle slightly, but the danger wasn't over. Hayes tried calling out in broken Japanese, basic phrases they'd been taught in Bougainville. Don't move. No weapons. We will not kill you. But they didn't understand. Instead, their fear deepened. Some began crying. One woman clasped her hands in front of her chest, shaking violently. The soldiers glanced at one another, unsure. Were there Japanese troops lying in ambush behind them? Were these women being used as bait? Was this a trap to lure Americans into the open? It wouldn't be the first time. The patrol huddled. Corporal Jim Wheeler whispered, "Sergeant, if this is a setup, we're dead." Private First Class McKinney argued, "Sergeant, look at them, they're terrified. They're not faking this." Hayes studied the women again. They weren't moving. They weren't trying to escape. And more importantly, they weren't trying to get closer. They were waiting for the Americans to end their lives. Hayes made a decision, one that could save the women or get the patrol wiped out. He ordered 2 men to cover from the treeline while he and 1 other soldier cautiously approached, rifles pointed low but ready. The women trembled uncontrollably. One whispered, "Kurosu, Kurosu, kill us." Hayes' stomach twisted. This wasn't a trick. This was terror so deep, it had hollowed them out. The patrol reached them, and what Hayes saw up close made his breath catch. The women had bruises around their wrists. Their ankles were raw from walking for days. One carried a child who wasn't moving. Another had a long slash down her arm, likely from shrapnel. They weren't combatants. They were victims of both sides, caught in a nightmare neither had chosen. As Hayes approached, the women pressed their heads lower to the ground, some covering their eyes, others whispering final prayers. They believed the end had arrived, and Hayes realized, if he made one wrong gesture, if a single soldier raised a rifle by accident, these women might panic or faint, or worse. He slowly crouched beside the nearest woman. She recoiled, whimpering. Then he did something unexpected. He slung his rifle behind his back and opened both hands, palms visible. Her eyes widened in confusion. Hayes spoke softly, "No kill, no kill," but she shook her head, unable to accept it. Japan had told her Americans didn't take prisoners, only corpses. The patrol radioed back. "Found civilians. Very bad condition. Request guidance." But headquarters responded, "All units are engaged. Proceed at your own discretion." Meaning, you're on your own. Hayes looked around. They were exposed. No shelter. No reinforcements. And Japanese scouts were known to trail American patrols at close distance. Every minute spent here increased the risk of ambush. He needed to make a decision. Fast. Should he force the women to move? Should he leave them behind? Should he wait for another unit? Or something else? Hayes took a breath and made the call that would make this moment unforgettable. Hayes stepped back and called out to his men, "Lower your rifles. All of you." They hesitated, but obeyed. Slowly, every American soldier lowered his weapon. The women looked up in disbelief. Their bodies trembled, but their eyes slowly changed. Fear was still there, but something else was emerging. Confusion, hope, disbelief. And then Hayes made the second decision that would define this encounter. Get the rations. All of them. The men stared. "Sergeant, what?" "You heard me. These women haven't eaten in days." McKinney grinned faintly. "So, we're giving them breakfast?" Hayes nodded. "Yeah, we are."